'Tis the season of polls, and in a new poll, 42% of college students say universities don't do enough to protect free speech. Meanwhile, 58% of college students tell the 42% to shut up, stupid Nazis, or we'll burn this college to the ground. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Ciao, Bella, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start with a new survey, the largest of its kind, that finds nearly half of college students say that their campus does not encourage or protect free speech. This is like a Captain Obvious poll. There's Rasmussen, right? There's Qualtrics, there's the Marquette Liberty, and there's Captain Obvious poll, right? Captain Obvious poll, right? It says about a half of American college kids, those are the half that recognize that speech is really under assault on American campuses. The 58% who don't think that, I guarantee you those are kids who are self-identified liberals. I've never had a problem expressing why Donald Trump is worse than Hitler. I've always been able to say things like that.
This massive poll, as you're indicating, was conducted by Real Clear Education, College Pulse, and the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, as we talk to them all the time about them. It was a first ever college free speech rankings that they released out, and our next story is actually going to be talking about this stuff too. So the massive polling, just so everyone is aware, had nearly 20,000 students, and they were asked a bunch of different questions. So we have different stories that you could, it's like a data field or mine that just you could just sift through it for weeks and weeks. And any nerd who likes data
and why can't
can just go through it and just find like
this through about the presidency?
It takes effort. Stop it.
Right. Instead of all these polls that say 8,000 different things, what if we polled 200,000 Americans? Do it one time, 3 weeks before the election.
Because statistically speaking, you need like 3,500 to get a somewhat accurate poll, and they think somewhat accurate is okay. So instead they go with 3,500 people and they get to respond. It's not how many they ask, so that's how many they can actually get to respond. And then you can do the plus or minus 3% margin of error.
So they're pretty worthless.
Yeah, that's how
speaking.
Statistical
but
data
this one
works.
Has some statistical chops,
right? It
has
some chops. 20,000 students at 55 different colleges or universities. And so they were asked about, free speech on campus. What's it like? Various questions. Again, you could just mine through all of it and it would be fun. And they ranked the schools then according to how open and tolerant the students say they are. And there were several other criteria, including student comments about their experience. So they've been working on this for a while because it takes a lot of time to compile 20,000 students and get all that stuff, for statistical analysis purposes. Okay, so as we learned from Nathan Hardin, who's the editor of Real Clear Education, he said in a statement, a university should be a lively marketplace of ideas, a place where different beliefs and opinions can be discussed, analyzed, and challenged with widest possible freedom. If students don't feel free to speak their minds, or if they aren't exposed to diverse points of view, it greatly diminishes the value of their education. Now more than ever, students and parents need help identifying colleges and universities that foster thoughtful examination of the most pressing issues facing society, from the state of race relations in America to the freedom of religion and association.
Isn't it amazing how a simple statement like that, which all of us take for granted, is completely unregarded on college universities?
Exactly.
They all pay lip service to it, right? Every
service.
chancellor will tell a young mom who wants to send her kid to that school, yeah, we honor we're all about the diversity here because I'm all about that. I'm all about that equality, equality.
Go with it.
Right?
So,
we're all about that. But in reality,
Mom and Dad, we know, Dr. Duke gets it all the time. Questions. Where can I send my kid to college if you keep talking about how awful colleges are? Where can I send them? What's a safe space, if you will, for them? And the fact that you found that 42% of students say that their college doesn't empower any free speech, who does empower it? Well, here's your top few. They're apparently the University of Chicago, right there in the heart of Illinois in the Midwest. They received the highest score in the free speech rankings.
Yeah, they've been in the news, though, for some pretty...
Exactly, which is telling.
Pretty liberal innovations over the last few months. So if that's the best you got in Chicago, where the last 4 or 5 stories we've done about them have been pretty much PC in the tank, it does make you wonder a little bit about just how bad this is.
And then if, in case you want to also stay somewhere in the Midwest, how about you head to Kansas State University, number 2? Not too shabby.
The problem is you have to live in Manhattan, Kansas.
Well, that is true. Go for it if you.
I would take it. And let me say why we're on this before you go through some more of that list. That advice that I would give parents: where would I find a safe spot for my kid? Don't send them to safe places. If you're sending your kid to places that actually take seriously safe places, your kid's not going to do well there anywhere if he's a conservative. Send your kids to schools where there are unsafe conversations. If your kids aren't having unsafe conversations, and by that I mean conversations that don't challenge what they already believe, then it's a waste of your time and money. Send them to places where there are unsafe spaces, places where kids can sit in a dorm room and talk about anything and not worry about one of the dorm mates running to the diversity officer, where professors will sit there and listen to ideas that they find repulsive or that the other students find repulsive, and respond back in kind and let people have their say.
Moving on, number 3 is Texas A&M. So if you just want to head south down to the big state of Texas.
And that has the reputation of being one of the few ROTC-driven, more conservative universities. Whether it is or not, I don't know. I sort of doubt it. But you got Texas A&M, University of Chicago, both of them have reputations of being, in their orbits, more conservative. What's the third one? What's the fourth one?
The third, the fourth, the fifth. Okay, the 4th on the list shocked me a little. University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA.
I'm doubting that.
Well, it's on the list according to, again, 20,000 students.
Is it possible that Los Angeles is so overridingly progressive? Like 90% of it, so no one ever thinks that.
So yeah, I can say what I want because we all. It's possible.
Man, I've been on this campus for 6 years, and I've said everything I've ever wanted, dude.
All right, one more, and we'll move on. Arizona State University comes in at number 5. Tell me, what is the worst university ranked on this whole list? You read the story, you know it. Good one. All right, DePaul University in Indiana. They said the highest percentage of students who self-censor was at 71%.
Wow.
So 7 out of 10 shut their traps. It's the other 30% who just won't stop yapping.
I would say that. In my experience, whenever you send your kid to a small liberal arts college, you should be very careful because everything there is shrunk. At these big state universities with 30, 40,000 kids, there's a state legislature paying attention. Look, in Texas, everybody knows what the University of Texas Austin is doing. In Indiana, everybody knows what UI Bloomington is happening there. What people don't pay any attention to this little 1,100, 1,200, 2,000 student liberal arts college that is controlled only by its board of regents, they're under much less necessity to actually provide you with free speech. I have found in my experiences that the small liberal arts colleges are the worst environments, the least friendly environments to serious exchanges of ideas because they don't have to be.
We're going to continue in our next story about the exact same survey that we talked about because they asked them a bunch of different questions. And one of those hypothetical questions was, would you support or oppose your school allowing a speaker on campus who promotes the following ideas? And then they listed the ideas. Now, what they found, again, 20,000 students took this survey at 55 different universities, and they actually found, based on the number of questions, we'll get to the stats on those, most students actually oppose allowing controversial speakers at all, like any sort of controversial topic. Most students actually say no to it. So they found that 71% opposed allowing a speaker on campus who would argue transgender people have a mental disorder. Okay, we could see that at a college university. We found that 64% oppose a speaker who'd argue abortion should be completely illegal, and 75% oppose a speaker who'd say Black Lives Matter is a hate group. Okay, again, still, these are on a college campus. These numbers don't shock me, and I don't think they shock you in the least at all. 85% oppose allowing a speaker on campus who promotes the idea that some racial groups are less intelligent than others.
Now that surprises me.
That's where we get interesting.
Why is that not 100%, number one?
That's the one where
then I would disagree with it. But look at the other ones, right? Transgender people, to say that 7 years ago, that was standard medical practice.
Yeah.
So the fact that what this tells me, this tells me less about student opinions and more about what the universities are pushing. What are the things that the universities are forcing down the throat of everybody every chance they get? And what it tells you, number one, is that they're really pushing gender hard, right? Transgenderism hard. Number two, the abortion thing is a big deal. Obviously, we know that. Black Lives Matter is a hate group. I could see that too, right? By the way, I'm going to go on and say it. I think Black Lives Matter is a hate group, and it's very close to being a terrorist group.
Well,
I think that's a completely defensible statement, even if you disagree with me. And yet, 75% of college kids, 3 out of 4, would say you're not allowed to say that. But then you got the other one, which of all of them would seem to be the one that you'd expect a much higher percentage of. 85, I get it. Those 15% are probably free speech absolutists, as I am too, right? But that's the one that surprises me.
And the next one,
74% oppose a speaker on campus who will argue that all white people are racist.
Right.
So on the
Only
one hand,
74%.
So on the one hand, you can't say overwhelmingly that some racial groups are less intelligent than others, but you can say that white people are more guilty than other people.
They oppose the people who are saying. So there's still 26% who are like, okay, you can come on and say that all white people are racist. Right. That's okay. Even if I'm sure that 26%, a lot of that, they're probably white.
And 55, I bet most of them are. And 55% of college kids oppose allowing a speaker who'd say Christianity has a negative influence on society. That's
Again,
pretty good.
Another shocking one.
Right?
Yeah. So it started off with the normal, and then we got a kind of shocking.
64% opposed allowing a speaker who promotes censoring the news as necessary. That should be higher.
Well, yeah.
Right?
Some of these ones that we think are like, well, duh, common sense, we think should be at 100%. And we're settling for like, yay, 55%.
Again, this is much more a barometer on what universities are jamming into kids' heads every chance they get.
And according to Nico Perino, who's the VP of Communications for FIRE, Nico said, it's startling that with nearly every type of controversial speaker we asked students about, majorities said they would oppose their schools allowing them to speak. Again, this is a majority said they would oppose any controversial topic. The only exception was a speaker who argues that the United States should support Israeli military policy. When it comes to controversial speakers, students flip the presumption of free speech on its head.
What grabs me about this is, if I were universities, I'd be ashamed of myself. They won't be. In fact, there are a lot of university bureaucrats out there like, only 85%.
We need to work harder.
Only 85%. The group thing. If I were a university administrator, this would bother me more than almost anything else. But then again, I would be your atypical university administrator. I'd never get to be an administrator with that worldview. But it's also disappointing about the kids. I get that this is learned behavior. This is culturally projected learning on these kids. So they're not ultimately completely responsible for this. But as a young person, I would feel really cheated if universities become places, safe spaces, places of no controversy. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. We need a little danger. Without that danger, that you cannot learn. Without threats, intellectual threats to what you believe, even if they're framed in very neutral ways, without challenging groupthink or whatever we think or individual think, nothing's going to change. And so what happens over time is more and more monolithic, they're not just becoming more politically correct. They're becoming kids who believe I should never have to hear anything that challenges anything anybody else believes.
So we talk about students not hearing an opinion or anything that they don't agree with, and it might be dangerous. And that's why at UW-Madison, we know free speech, it's clearly dead. Or it's so close to dead that you might as well just end its misery. We have a story from UW-Madison's Badger Herald, which is one of their college newspapers. They fired a conservative columnist shortly after they refused to run his op-ed. Trip Grebe is his name, and he was so controversial because he wrote an opinion editorial piece stating that he does not think the police should be defunded.
And
I'm so offended.
I've read this.
I'm so offended.
For a so-called conservative, he's constantly apologizing for his opinion. And while I can see, he's always ceding. It's not even a seriously threatening article.
And on top of it, it's not even that opinionated in the sense that he had nearly 20 different sources citing all of these things about the defunding of police and why we shouldn't do that. So,
all 20 of those sources weren't from The Nation, dude.
Well, his unpublished op-ed had said, if we're expecting police officers to be better, why would we be taking money away from them? When schools are failing, we don't defund schools. We give them more money and implement new plans to ensure their success. Ooh, burn.
I think that's a silly point because you've given away the game. You've already conceded that police, like the schools, have failed. The schools fail, they get more money. The police fail. Stop. The premise is wrong. The police have not failed. Some very small number of police officers, like some very small number of priests or some very large number of university professors, have failed.
Okay.
But we don't pretend that they haven't.
All right. Well, the newspaper's opinion editor, and I might not pronounce her name correctly, I apologize, to Samia Bhushan, wrote in an email that while the piece was well written, it was too much of a hot take.
Yes.
And that upper management of the paper, a student newspaper, I was upper management of a student newspaper. I did not call myself upper management. That's just silly. They were worried it may alienate incoming freshmen.
Yeah. See, this is the excuse for censorship, isn't it?
Well, additionally, we just posted an editorial board supporting BLM and another article publicly endorsing 2 candidates who want to defund the police. As a result, your article would cause a lot of backlash that we can't afford right now.
These are reporters, right?
This is an opinion. Hey, she is upper management.
And we just posted a couple of stories that were pro defunding the police. So if we allow you to have a say, we're going to be confusing people.
In the opinion editorial section, not in the news section. Oh, my word. Anyway, so he was then Tripp was then told he was dismissed. He was fired then because of the sourcing issues. Again, even though he had 20 sources.
So this became
it became like, why we need to fire him for some reason.
So people called out the hypocrisy, and all of a sudden he wasn't getting fired because he was a conservative. He didn't handle his sourcing well.
Meanwhile, here, let's take a look at the Badger Herald just for a hot second, what they have in their banter section. That's the UW banter. It's a whole section. And I would just like to point out that you can find out a lot of information. Like if your dorm was an Harry Potter house. Ooh, which dorm?
What was that?
Harry Potter. Harry Potter, and they wrote Harry Potter.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're basically culturally appropriating the English dialect.
That's how they say it. Harry Potter. They wrote Harry Potter.
Right away we see cultural appropriation at the top of the page.
They write about finding love on Zoom. Then Tinder's hottest tips, tricks, and pickup lines, and quarantini, lockdown drinking games. But my favorite banter topic was actually which outdoor patio are you? They had that later on in the. Which outdoor patio are you?
I'm a lanai. I'm full lanai all the time.
No. Anyway, I also found an interesting fact. The Badger Herald, because I know nerdy facts like this, they actually were started in 1969 by a group of just 4 students who were conservative. And that paper was meant to be the conservative counter to the radical Daily Cardinal, which, if you knew anything about RADS and the bombing of Sterling Hall, the bombers were affiliated with the Daily Cardinal. So Badger Herald used to be something good.
The so-called conservative paper has now been appropriated. And let's throw the picture of that editor up again. Here is your revolutionary. There she is, right? They're turning out young, hip, slightly confused editors to undo the conservative newspaper on campus. And I looked at the stories, 20 sources. They're perfectly fine sources. He actually went out of his way, this kid, to be balanced in the sources that he picked. And so that argument that ultimately we fired him because of how he mishandled. And did they ever explain what the mishandling of sources was?
Of course not.
No. He just, in other words, there's sources we don't like. So you didn't go to the New York Times, you went to the Columbus paper, right? You looked at you got an article from Fox News, right? But not MSNBC. That's enough to get you disqualified when you're trying to cover your butts for firing your only conservative columnist.
It's time for some real education. Petra, originally known to its inhabitants in Nab, is a historical and archaeological city in southern Jordan. The area around Petra has been inhabited from as early as 7000 BC, and the Nabateans might have settled in what would become the capital city of their kingdom as early as the 4th century BC. However, archaeological work has only discovered evidence of Nabatean presence dating back to the 2nd century BC, by which time Petra had become their capital. The Nabateans were nomadic Arabs who invested in Petra's proximity to the trade routes by establishing it as a major regional trading hub.
So one of the reasons we've not heard more about these people is because they were nomadic, right? Like the Native Americans, many Native Americans, they did not have fixed places to live. They followed shipping lines in order to figure out how to live their lives. They were nomadic. I'm sure they had their flocks that they had to keep moving on to greener pastures, so to speak. So that's why we really don't know about this kingdom. All we know about them is Petra. It's odd. If you take a look at the pictures, Mike, that's Petra, and it's carved into the middle of a rock. It's absolutely gorgeous. In fact, it was one of the sites for one of the Indiana Jones films, one of the backdrops. You're coming. It's very hard to find. You're out there in the middle of nothing, and you literally come through a tiny little gap in a couple of clashing rocks, and out you come, and this is what you see. Access to this city is through a 3/4 of a mile gorge called the Seek, which leads directly to the Kajna, famous for its rock-cut architecture and water conduit system. Yeah, there you walk through there, right? And you see this. So, I mean, literally, it was rediscovered fairly late, and it's often forgot about. UNESCO did make it one of the 7 modern wonders of the world. But you can see it, and it wasn't a permanent habitation either. This was a place where these nomadic roaming Arabs could meet to engage in certain forms of trade. Petra is also called the Rose City because of the color of the stone from which it is carved. It has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1985. I mean, that's something like very Indiana Jones, right? You got those sheer rose-colored granite cliffs. You have this beautiful carving, this beautiful city built into the wall, recessed into the wall that way, the wall of the gorge. As mentioned, in 2007, Al-Kashnesh was voted to one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Tourism in the city was crippled, however. There is the amphitheater associated with the Petra area, where they obviously had large-scale entertainments. And so this is one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Tourism in the city was pretty significantly crippled by the COVID-19 pandemic. To say it went from a thriving tourist industry to literally nothing with the pandemic, as visitor numbers plummeted to 0 since March of 2020. The Jordanian government has authorized excavations in front of the treasury to make use of the site's emptiness. So now that people aren't showing up tourist-wise, they're using it to do some renovations. And so one of those great hidden mysteries by people who didn't give us much. They didn't give us much oral history, much written history. We don't have a lot of stories about them. They might otherwise had completely vanished from the face of history if it weren't for the one non-nomadic thing they did, which is kind of ironic, right? The one apparently non-nomadic thing they did was to create this remarkable piece of architecture buried in the middle of the Mideastern Jordan that people had a hard time even locating, still to this day have a hard time finding their way to. If it weren't for that one permanent thing in their otherwise nomadic culture, we probably would have forgotten their names altogether.
All right, just as a reminder, these premier beverage vessels of freedom are now available when you join our Patriot Club with a one-time $99 tax-deductible donation. All you have to do to sign up is visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us. Now we're going to wrap things up with the fun fact of the day, and it's an English nerd fun fact. If you were to properly write adjectives in their order, it would be listing them by the amount, the value, the size, the temperature, the age, shape, the color, the origin, and then the material.
Okay then, and that's going to do it for us this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, and she's Katie. Until next time, stay educated.